Through trembling field glasses pressed against frozen eyes, a German observer from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division witnessed something on December 23, 1944, that would forever transform his understanding of the war. At 11:45 hours from his observation post on Senonchamps Hill, Belgium, he watched the sky above Bastogne fill with an armada that defied comprehension. Mein Gott, the sky, it's full of them. Hundreds upon hundreds. This cannot be happening, he whispered into the bitter December air. Through his periscope sight, transport planes filled the Belgian sky like migrating birds. Not the dozen aircraft that desperate defenders might scrape together, but 241 C-47s demonstrating a level of air superiority that made the Wehrmacht's greatest victories seem like distant memories. Until December 23rd, weather had prevented resupply operations. 7 days of low clouds, freezing fog, and snow had grounded the feared Allied air forces, giving German forces their first opportunity since Normandy to move in daylight without facing devastating air attacks. But now the Americans were casually displaying air power that exceeded anything the Third Reich had achieved. Even at the height of its power, the offensive had begun with supreme confidence 7 days earlier. On December 16, 1944, at precisely 5:30 am, the Germans launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split Allied armies and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. A massive 90-minute artillery barrage using 600 artillery pieces across an 80-mile front had initially exceeded all expectations. General Major Heinz Kokott of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division later recalled, during the evening hours of December 15th, the final troop movements took place. It was cold and dark. The narrow paths of the Eifel, some covered with ice, were densely crowded with troops and vehicles moving forward to their positions of departure. The soldiers had been told this was Germany's moment of destiny. The Führer himself had planned this offensive, promising them that weak, decadent Americans would crumble before German determination. Their lines in the Ardennes were held by inexperienced troops and exhausted divisions sent there to rest. The Wehrmacht would knife through them like the glory days of 1940 when German armies had conquered France in 6 weeks. The initial success seemed to validate every promise. The Wehrmacht had achieved complete tactical surprise. American positions crumbled under the assault's weight, with entire units surrendering or fleeing westward in panic. The roads to Antwerp seemed open. By December 18th, German forces were racing toward their objectives with stunning speed. The mathematics of the offensive seemed simple. 7 major roads converged on Bastogne, and controlling those roads meant controlling the entire American supply system in the Ardennes. Without Bastogne, Americans couldn't move reinforcements, supply their forces, or mount counteroffensives. Heinrich Freiherr von Leutwitz's 47th Panzer Corps received responsibility for capturing Bastogne before crossing the Meuse near Namur. Leutwitz planned to attack an 11-kilometer front with 3 divisions. The 26th Volksgrenadier and 2nd Panzer would lead the assault, with Panzer Lehr Division behind them. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division advanced with particular determination. Its Panzerjäger anti-tank battalion had its full complement of 14 tracked Hetzer tank destroyers and an impressive 40 275 mm anti-tank guns, making it one of the best equipped Volksgrenadier units in the Ardennes. They were ready for American armor, ready for desperate counterattacks, ready for anything except what they would actually encounter. But the first signs of something different began appearing as they approached Bastogne. Americans weren't simply retreating in disorder. They were falling back in organized fashion, destroying bridges, establishing roadblocks, making Germans pay for every mile. Units such as Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division held Germans off long enough for leading elements of the 101st Airborne Division to arrive in Bastogne, a mere 4 hours ahead of leading German forces. The 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, had been resting in Reims, France, when the German offensive began. Within hours, they were loaded onto trucks and racing through the night toward Bastogne. They arrived exhausted, under-equipped for winter warfare, and immediately thrown into defensive positions. Yet they arrived in time, and that would make all the difference. By December 20th, German forces had successfully surrounded Bastogne. All 7 highways leading to the town were cut by German forces by noon on December 21st, and by nightfall, the conglomeration of airborne and armored infantry forces were recognized by both sides as being surrounded. The trap had snapped shut. Inside were elements of the 101st Airborne Division, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and various other units. Approximately 22,000 men in total. The American soldiers were outnumbered approximately 5 to 1 and lacking cold weather gear, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and senior leadership, as many senior officers, including the 101st Commander Major General Maxwell Taylor, were elsewhere. From the German perspective, it was Stalingrad in reverse. Now Americans were trapped, cut off, doomed to surrender or die. General Lieutenant Heinrich Freiherr von Alutowitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps, was supremely confident. He had been in France in 1940 when the British Expeditionary Force was trapped at Dunkirk. He had seen what happened to encircled forces. They withered, their morale collapsed, they surrendered. The Americans in Bastogne had perhaps 3 days of ammunition, maybe 4 days of food if they rationed carefully. The harsh winter weather, with temperatures dropping to -10 degrees Celsius, would do half the work for him. Confidence was so high that the 2 panzer divisions of the 47th Panzer Corps, after using their mobility to isolate Bastogne, continued their mission toward the Meuse on December 22nd, rather than attacking Bastogne with a single large force. Inside Bastogne, the situation grew increasingly desperate with each passing day. Some guns had no high explosive shells left, others had only half a dozen. Rations were totally exhausted. Defenders were reduced to scavenging supplies from destroyed vehicles and abandoned depots. Medical supplies were critically low, and wounded men were dying from injuries that would have been survivable with proper treatment. On December 22nd, certain of imminent victory, the Germans sent their surrender demand. The scene was almost theatrical in its formality. At about 11:30 in the morning, 4 German soldiers waving 2 white flags approached American lines using the Arlon Road from the direction of Remoy-Fosse, south of Bastogne. The ultimatum was typed in both English and German, formal and threatening. The fortune of war is changing. This time the USA forces in and near Bastogne have been encircled by strong German armored units. The message demanded honorable surrender within 2 hours, threatening total annihilation if refused. When the American response came back, a single word, Nantes? German command was genuinely puzzled. McAuliffe reportedly replied with the cryptic statement that somewhat confused the Germans at first. Lieutenant Henk had to have it explained to him by Conno Harper. If you don't understand what nuts means in plain English, it is the same as go to hell. Back at German headquarters, the response caused consternation. No surrounded force had ever responded so dismissively to a surrender demand. General Major Kokot was reportedly stunned. In post-war interrogations, he would reveal, "We offered honorable terms. We had them surrounded 5 to 1. No supplies could reach them. To refuse seemed not brave but insane." December 23, 1944. Dawned with something Germans hadn't seen in a week, clear skies. German soldiers emerged from their frozen foxholes, grateful for sunshine that might warm their frozen limbs. Many had spent the night in temperatures well below freezing, their feet numb, their weapons frozen. Then they heard it, a distant drone that grew steadily louder, echoing off the hills surrounding Bastogne. At 6:45 in the morning, planes carrying 2 Pathfinder sticks took off from Chalgrove, headed for Belgium. These were the lead elements, the guides who would mark drop zones for the main force. They jumped at 9:35 a.m., were quickly captured by American forces and rushed to set up their equipment. At 11:50 on December 23rd, men all along the front saw the planes coming in. It was the most heartening spectacle of the entire siege. For Americans, it was salvation. For Germans, it was the beginning of understanding their terrible miscalculation. The main force appeared at 11:50 am, 241 C-47 aircraft flying in perfect formation at barely 1,000 feet altitude. They came in waves, each group of planes releasing their cargo in sequence, the sky filling with parachutes of different colors, each color indicating different supplies. German anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their guns. The 80mm flak guns, pride of German artillery, swiveled skyward. 20mm automatic cannons began their rapid chatter. Machine guns added their voices to the crescendo. The sky filled with black puffs of exploding shells. American planes flew straight through the barrage, maintaining formation with almost suicidal determination. 14 C-47s were lost on their way or over the drop zone. Shot down or so badly damaged they crashed. But for every plane that fell, 15 more continued on course, doors open, bundles tumbling out into the December sky. German soldiers watched in disbelief as damaged aircraft, engines smoking, wings torn by flak, maintained course long enough to drop their supplies before banking away or crashing. One C-47, its tail assembly completely engulfed in flames, flew directly over German positions, the crew pushing out supply bundles until the very last moment before the plane dove into the forest. What followed was a masterclass in American logistics that shattered German morale more effectively than any artillery barrage. The colored parachutes descended like multicolored snowstorm, thousands upon thousands drifting down onto snow-covered fields around Bastogne. Red parachutes carried artillery shells, mortar rounds, and small arms ammunition. Blue parachutes brought medical supplies, surgical equipment, plasma, and morphine. Yellow parachutes delivered K rations, D rations, and canned food. White parachutes contained blankets, winter clothing, boots, and gloves. By the end of the day, one battalion alone had 528 K rations on hand along with 250 gallons of gasoline. But the morning drop was just the beginning. Throughout December 23rd, additional missions arrived. At 2 p.m. another wave appeared, this time including gliders towed by C-47s carrying heavier supplies that couldn't be parachuted, 92 4 tons, including two 975 gallons of gasoline. These gliders brought complete surgical units, including doctors, nurses, and operating equipment. They brought jeeps, communications equipment, and even replacement artillery pieces. One glider carried nothing but whole blood for transfusions, a medical luxury the German army couldn't provide even to its highest-ranking officers. As if the transport armada wasn't demoralizing enough, the clear weather brought something even worse: the return of American air superiority in its most terrifying form. P-47 Thunderbolts started attacking German troops on the roads, coming in low and fast with 50-caliber machine guns blazing and rockets screaming from under their wings. They hunted everything that moved: supply trucks, horse-drawn artillery, individual vehicles, even small groups of soldiers. Every road became a death trap. Every movement in daylight invited destruction. German forces that had moved freely for a week were suddenly paralyzed. By nightfall on December 23rd, the psychological transformation among German besiegers was complete. They had witnessed not just a supply drop, but a demonstration of overwhelming industrial and logistical superiority that defied comprehension. The mathematics were undeniable and depressing. If America could afford to risk hundreds of aircraft and crews to supply one surrounded division, what reserves must they have? December 24th brought clouds and snow again, grounding the massive air fleets. German commanders hoped this might restore their advantage. The 26th Volksgrenadier received one Panzergrenadier regiment from the 15th Panzergrenadier Division on Christmas Eve for its main assault the next day. This would be their last chance. They had to take Bastogne before the weather cleared again. The attack began in the pre-dawn darkness of Christmas morning. 18 Mark IV tanks with supporting infantry broke through the thin defensive line and the 327th Glider Infantry and began advancing toward Hemrel. For a moment, it seemed Germans might succeed. But the American response was ferocious and backed by ammunition that had been delivered just 2 days earlier. Of the 18 tanks that began the assault, none survived the day. December 26th delivered the final blow to German hopes. The siege was lifted when a spearhead of the 4th Armored Division and other elements of General George Patton's Third Army opened a corridor to Bastogne. In the gathering darkness just after 1700 hours, the first elements of Combat Command R of the 4th Armored Division broke through the German encirclement from the south and relieved the siege. The first American tanks to enter Bastogne were from the 37th Tank Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who would later command all U.S. forces in Vietnam. They found the defenders exhausted but unbroken, supplied by air, confident in victory. The numbers tell the story more starkly than any personal account. According to U.S. Army records, during the Siege of Bastogne, 120.7 tons of supplies and equipment, including 4 of 900 gallons of gasoline, were dropped to the 101st Airborne by parachute, and 92.4 tons, including 2 975 gallons of gasoline, were landed by glider. Compare this to German capabilities. German forces around Bastogne initially numbered 54,000 men. American forces in Bastogne numbered 22,000 men. German aircraft sorties over Bastogne less than 100, American aircraft sorties over 2,000. German supplies delivered by air 0. Post-war analysis by German military professionals confirmed what soldiers in the field had instinctively understood. General der Panzertruppe So von Manteuffel, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the offensive, reflected that Bastogne demonstrated the Americans had solved modern warfare's fundamental problem: logistics. They could supply encircled forces by air more efficiently than Germany could supply advancing forces by road. Generalmajor Heinz Kokott provided perhaps the most succinct assessment in his post-war interrogation when those transport planes filled the sky on December 23rd. Every German soldier who saw them understood that they were not fighting just an army. They were fighting an entire industrial civilization, and they were armed with rifles and horses. The psychological impact of the Bastogne air supply spread rapidly through German ranks across the entire Ardennes offensive. Every unit had soldiers who had either witnessed it directly or heard detailed accounts from those who had. The story grew with each telling, but the essential truth remained: America possessed material resources beyond German comprehension. The most bitter irony for German forces was that they had created the very conditions for their own psychological defeat. By surrounding Bastogne, they had forced the Americans to demonstrate their air supply capabilities. Had they bypassed the town as originally planned, they might never have witnessed this display of overwhelming material superiority. What the German soldiers had witnessed was merely a fraction of American industrial capacity. They didn't know that over 10,000 C-47s were produced during the war, that American factories were producing aircraft at rates Germany couldn't match, or that more than 50 Zeranosen paratroopers were dropped by C-47s during the war. History has validated the psychological impact of the Bastogne air supply on German forces. Military historians consider it a pivotal moment, not just in the Battle of the Bulge, but in demonstrating the futility of conventional military operations against overwhelming industrial superiority. German prisoner interrogations after December 23rd showed a marked change in tone. Before the air supply, captured Germans spoke of temporary setbacks and eventual victory. After witnessing the aerial armada, they spoke only of survival and hope that the war would end quickly. The 101st Airborne would never surrender because they didn't need to. Their nation could supply them through the very air itself, turning the ancient art of siege warfare into an obsolete relic. The German soldiers who watched those 241 C-47s on December 23, 1944, witnessed not just the relief of Bastogne, but the future of warfare itself. A future that belonged to the nation, that could fill the sky with aircraft as easily as Germany could fill a field with soldiers. They had seen the arithmetic of American abundance, and in those numbers was written the final chapter of the Third Reich. The war would continue for another 5 months. But for those who witnessed the sky over Bastogne fill with American planes, it had ended on that clear December morning when they realized that the 101st would never surrender. Not because they were braver or better soldiers, but because their nation would never let them fail.